Coming together from across the United States. The real issues you don't hear about elsewhere. Focusing on what matters to you and your neighbors. Welcome to Resistbot Live.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is October 24th, 2021. I'm your moderator, Melanie Dion, and this is Resistbot Live. Welcome, and thank you for joining us again. I'm joined with one of my favorites, Christine Liu. We've also got our good friend, Athena Foulé. She will be monitoring the comments for you guys. Just want to remind you that we are here this Sunday and every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can watch us, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to us on YouTube or Twitch. We would really love it if you would subscribe to us on YouTube and Twitch. We don't want to have to do cute TikTok dances to convince you to do it. I have bad knees and I have no coordination. None of us will like it. So please come join us over there. Hi, Christine.
Hey, happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. Last week I had an amazing conversation with Dr. Nancy Oretskin with Asylum 101, which I think was really just, it was a wealth of information, which I appreciate, but the information that we got showed me that we're just scratching the surface on what it means to understand immigration and asylum, especially how as it pertains to the United States. Today we have, we'll be talking about personal experiences, our American stories, one of which you have. We'll also be hearing from an amazing woman named Cece, who is still in the process, who is still, in the process of obtaining her permanent residency here. I am so sorry. My computer blanked for a second. So Christine, as we get in, do we have Athena with us?
We are. I'm right here. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Athena.
How's it going?
Good.
Doing
Now
great.
it's a party.
Happy Sunday.
We're Halliwelling it. We're relying on the power of three.
Okay. Like it? Nice strong number.
Love it. So Athena, you'll be manning the comments for us.
I will.
And helping.
I'll be staffing the chat and answering any questions, sort of prompting our listeners and viewers to add their comments and suggestions as we go along. It's really great. Happy to be here. That we're continuing the conversation about immigration, as we are a country of immigrants. So having folks' perspectives in terms of their own immigration story to the United States is important. And I look forward to hearing more.
Thank you so much. And rather than hearing a whole bunch of small talk from me, I would like to dive right in, Christine, to talking about you, because you have an American story that we would love to hear.
Right. So I was born in Taiwan, and I came here actually to the U.S. when I was just 2 years old. So, my parents immigrated in the 70s, and I often talk about that because there are a couple of narratives over the years that have really led me to kind of explore what it means to be an immigrant, or be more conscious of how this group of Americans are viewed, and at least from my lens and experience. And one of the notions that I have sought to dispel over the recent years is that there's this different kind of immigrant. There is legal versus illegal, like we talked about in the last show. And what really has bothered me about that is in looking into how I arrived here, right? Going way back to the 70s, you realize um, it wasn't too long ago that people that looked like me were completely legally banned from even entering the country, the Chinese Exclusion Act. So growing up, we didn't really, I wasn't really conscious of that. That's not what we kind of, as you know, our history books are not very, you know, uh, informative when it comes to certain parts of our history, and that was one of them. So once I realized that it was really because of the civil rights movement that there was a wave of immigrants from Asia that was allowed to come in the 70s, my parents and I being beneficiaries of that, that really kind of felt less othered. Does that make sense? Like we're always thought that, the communities that we always feel like, okay, we're new, so keep your head down, don't say anything, kind of build that American dream in your, respective, I guess, bubbles, if you will. And this feeling when realizing that, wow, it's because of African Americans that as Asian Americans are even able to, have the ability to come here again, that really set me on a journey of, okay, then what else is it that I don't know, or what else have I been blind to? Then what things do we have more in common than feeling like we are othered all the time? So that's the part of, my journey that I'm really present to now. The other part is just kind of trying to find the commonalities because there's so many reasons, especially as the perpetual foreigner, if you will, for us to be othered, regardless of different communities. And here's the part that we all see and we've talked about before, for us to be wedge issues, if you will. One community is better than the other because they came in this way versus that. So I spend a lot of my time trying to understand the experience, which is why the last episode on Asylum 101 was so informative to me, because obviously we touched upon there's a certain privilege that comes from me being 2 years old and having the luxury and privilege of a visa that allowed me to hop on a plane with my father and mother, and arrive in the US as a toddler. And go through the system and the motions, versus those that are just for historical reasons or just for legality reasons coming in a different way. And but once we arrive here, the American stories that I am really inspired by is this commonality of once we are allowed to come in whatever way we come in, you see this generational shift, this notion. One thing that used to really annoy me when I was younger was hearing why don't Chinese Americans assimilate specific to my community? Why don't Taiwanese Americans? Why don't those from Hong Kong assimilate? Because, I grew up in a part of Los Angeles that, to this day, my parents don't speak the language. And it's not until recent years that I said, okay, this is how it works. First wave of immigrants don't even have time to assimilate. We are so busy just trying to get our bearings in a country that we really want to be part of, learning the language, learning the culture. And what's beautiful is to see as time goes by, the next generation emerge. And this has been in our history. And so why wouldn't I want that for other groups and communities? And why wouldn't I want to be cognizant of that now that, we see folks coming in from Afghanistan even, if we're talking the biplane immigrants versus those that are on the border of Mexico coming from different countries. I think it's really important for us to have like this to tell all our stories and to also be cognizant of others.
Christine, when you mentioned something earlier about the disparity of who comes in, how, and there's also the presumption of based on our races on our race kind of can determine how someone assumes that you came into the country. Did you find yourself having to disabuse people of certain notions in that respect?
Right. Yes, and I often actually talk about my own, like, if we want to get on the topic of privilege, you have to acknowledge that certain groups are treated differently in how they arrive in this country. And I feel very lucky. I always say ignorance is bliss. I grew up in a part of America that is predominantly Asian and Latino. And I say that because I grew up with the full, I guess, scope of my culture at home, and also being immersed in, Latino immigrant culture, mostly Mexican immigrant culture. My parents had, a small Chinese restaurant that they opened in East Los Angeles, and I have memories of being that Chinese takeout kid, that generation of kids that did their homework after school in the back of a Chinese restaurant. So I say all that because there was always a comfort level around me as to who I was. um, you know, Things that I realized later on, not all immigrants, when they try to assimilate in America, don't have the luxury of doing, because, they are few and far between in other communities. And that really is reflected in then their viewpoint of how they, how they grow up. So I definitely see that there is definitely a disparity in terms of how different groups are treated. And I think sometimes that's by design, but maybe that's a whole other show.
I think so. I think when you mentioned how much of the civil rights movement impacted your ability to immigrate to the U.S., how did that change your view? And given that that you were 2 years old, you started school here and things like that. But how did that change your view as you got old and as you had that knowledge with the experience of immigrants and how it can be sort of a deliberate
Oh
method of
yeah, I think
with
they call us
marginalized.
we're a wedge. I mean, I try to dance around it, but what I realize that we are, we meaning Asian Americans. Um, in recent years, we are conveniently so leveraged when it comes to, the minimizing and marginalization of other groups. And I'll be really straightforward on that. You'll hear me say that on Twitter. A lot of people don't know that Asian Americans, actually 70% of us, support affirmative action. You will never know it by the narrative in the media, and also by those that have an interest in leveraging our community and, almost using us as a front to go forward and do things like sue Harvard or sue, Yale University or different, communities, and really raise that issue. And you really become yeah, you really become present to the fact, like, hey, hold on a second. Why are we being leveraged to be, the divisive wedge into that actually I support and believe in, now that I am older and I know better, right? So that's just one example, but time and time again, this is something that really weighs on me. A majority of, it's no surprise that a majority of Asian Americans, if you pay attention, AAPI community being the fastest growing voter demographic now, we are largely skewing Democrat, when traditionally we were counted on both as either being independent or leaning more Republican, right? There's a reason for that. In the last election, and I pay attention to this because my son is 16 years old. He'll be voting age in the next presidential election. 86% of Black youth voted Democrat. 83% of Asian American youth voted Democrat. So this is an interesting trend that I again, maybe another show I would love to focus on, because in communities where there have traditionally been a large population of Asian immigrants over the last several decades, now they are voters and they are becoming more vocal. People such as myself, are advocating for ourselves, and we're really realizing that, our politics isn't really in what our parents thought that they were supposed to follow, right? And so there's a sense of agency there. And I think it'll be interesting to see the effects of that.
And I have one more question in terms of family and in coming here community. Did you, when you arrived here, did your family have a bit of their own community support, or were you somewhat isolated? How did that work out for you?
So I believe, again, the criticism growing up being and the othering of us as a community being, why don't Asians assimilate, right? And now that I am in a position where I look back, I am so glad that my parents, when they arrived in the US, sought to raise us in a community of other Taiwanese Americans and Chinese Americans so that we could better assimilate. So, this is a recurring thread amongst all immigrant communities. It's not the assimilation of the first generation. We're just trying to get our bearings when we just get here. But it's the possibilities and the promise of what the reason why they came over more often than not is for the children. And so, so I think that makes a big difference. I could see that in my first year of college when I went to Boston University. And for the first time, I came across other friends who were Asian American, but had grown up in predominantly white communities or communities that did not have a large number of them, where they were often the only one. Jokingly, they were the Asian population in their town in Alabama, for example, and so there is, I think, a benefit to, why we see these communities grow and these, immigrant communities are a source of, and it's been through history. I mean, look at the Chinatowns all through history. That's indicative of that. I think those are very important parts of our society, actually.
Did we have any? Thank you, Christine, for that. First of all, just wanted to touch base with you, Athena. Do we have any questions that we?
No, we don't. It's pretty quiet thus far in the different chat sections. So,
I mean, Christine gave us a lot.
a lot to work with.
So I think that's a statement on also how common that is for smaller groups, minority, non-white groups in this country. How there's just a common thread that I think all of us can relate to. We spoke with Cece, who joined us. We have some pre-recorded content that we spoke with Cece yesterday, who had a very a very different story, a very different experience from Christine. One of the things about immigration that we sometimes the American sentiment is, oh, they want to come over here and blah blah blah. These are people who are leaving their homes. And leaving home is a very difficult, sometimes hard fought decision to make. And so Cece's story was very important. And when we deal with someone who is leaving home when they don't necessarily want to, those events can be traumatic. And so I do want to issue a content warning for the following, for this next segment. There will be mentions of sexual assault, trauma, and violence. But I think Cece has a very important story that I think we can all benefit from in learning what the process is like in immigrating to America. So we're joined by phone with one of our guests, Cece, who is currently in her immigration process right now. Hi, Cece, welcome.
Hi, Mel. Hi, Susan.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us and for trusting us with your story. We really appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you.
So can you give us a little bit of the background of what your process was like in coming here, in coming over, um, particularly in the realms of how you were treated, from what your expectations were to how you were treated when you actually got here.
Definitely. Before I go into the process, I will just dive a little bit on the reasons why my family decided to move to the United States. Um, Before I was born, my dad, who is a medical doctor and a professor in family medicine, um, was very active in politics. Not a politician, but he was fighting for democracy in my country. And in 1984, the then head of state, who is now the president of the country, proscribed the Nigerian Medical Association as a terrorist organization. And soon after that, we started having, when I was born, my early memories was another head of state who came in, who was friends with that head of state, sent someone to find a way to deal with my father. And one of the only ways they saw was to um, find a way to kill his children. Um, Unfortunately, for me and my sister, we went on a retreat with my father. And instead of killing us, they did something much worse and sexually assaulted me and my sister instead. So for years, we kept having problems till we would get the like a secret service kind of thing coming to our house, always asking for tapes, always asking for different things. And my, of course, they couldn't find anything, and they kept threatening to shoot us and shoot our dogs. But that did not, you know, they would take away cassette tapes, they would take away papers. That kept happening till um, the head of state died. And even when he died, before, like some days before he died, my dad had to leave the country. He went to England. When he died, my dad stayed there for a few weeks and came back. It was relatively safe for us to be there again. But when this new head of state came in, we started getting fresh threats. Um, I was in the country for longer because I had a job, I had a business back in my country, and I was doing, fairly well for myself. I used to, come over to the United States for holidays. Even though I had my brother here and my mom was here, so I just used to come in. And I would tell you that coming in was a different experience. I would get like office airline attendants look down on me, and when I wanted to give them a tip, they'll look down on me like I couldn't afford it, which was laughable. I was like, "How much is it?" Um, but in 2015, when it became more dangerous, especially for me, I was the only one left. My dad knew it was going to get dangerous. So he was, he left. Everybody left. But I was like, why should I leave? I have my whole life here. I have my dog. I have my car. I have an apartment. I'm living my life. Um, there was, then I saw that they poisoned my dog and killed my dog. Um, they stationed two people in front of my house to come with machetes. That was when I knew I had to leave the country. I started staying in. Yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
And no, no, please don't apologize. I just think it's very important that it's pointed out that this is, you had a life in your home, that, like you
Yes,
said, this was your home, and
yes.
leaving and going through this process was a difficult decision. So when you arrived at the point of agreeing with your family that it was no longer safe, what was the process like getting here and going through the process of obtaining citizenship or permanent residency?
I can tell you that I didn't think when I was packing my things. I mean, even till today, I left important things back home, albums, pictures of my childhood that I could never get again. There were a lot of things that I left behind. I just literally packed up and left. I was pregnant at that time, and because I couldn't go to a hospital. I couldn't get medical care because I was scared. I did not want anybody to harm me or my child. So, and I kept getting flashbacks of getting sexually assaulted, and I knew that I didn't want that for my daughter.
Right.
So I literally just packed up my things and left. Before I decided to, my dad literally used his life savings to buy us a house where we stay now. Um, so it was easier for me to literally just pack in some things. I literally left with 2 boxes and a backpack. That was all I came to the United States with, because I had to um, give my car out to someone. Um, my business, I tried as much as possible to, make it work from the United States, but with time difference and everything, I lost my business, and of course, I lost my job. Um, so my process was I had to come to the United States to file for asylum. That was that was the process for me and my entire family. It's not been an easy process. I can tell you, it's been time consuming. It's been financially consuming, because when people actually think that when you come into this country you have everything's just going to work out automatically, that's a lie. It's not. Um, you have to get lawyers. You have to understand the system, because it is complicated. It's not easy. Um, and people right now, all me and my family were doing is just literally working to pay our legal fees. It is a strain on the family, but we're trying all we can to make it work. You know, um, we didn't we didn't know a lot about how the system works. So when we first got in, we had a lawyer who was trying to guide us on the process, how to, go about writing affidavits. Like I said, it's a really long process. We are still going through it. We are trying to follow this process no matter how long it takes. I have been in this country since 2016, and I can tell you that till now I am still waiting. The good thing is, while you're here, it is a long time, but you will get a work authorization that you can use to work. And it doesn't. And the good thing about the work authorization, when you're pending an asylum case, is that you can work anywhere. It's not like a H-1B or one of the employer-based visas. So you can work anywhere. And great, I was able to work. Um, like I said, we're still in this process. It is long. It is financially, actually, it's more emotionally consuming, because
Mhm.
you don't know what anybody is going to say. They might send you to an immigration judge, and if you do go to an immigration judge, you literally at the mercy of one person listening to your story and saying, "Okay, I think you are fearful for your life, and you should remain in the United States." On the other hand, the person can also look at you and say, "Oh, I don't think that you're a victim, and I think you should leave the United States."
So
Um,
about that, can I ask a question of
yeah.
you? Do you find in do you find this to be parts that are unnecessarily difficult for you, roadblocks that are somewhat that aren't necessary, but potentially roadblocks that you face as a Black woman?
And if I could tag on to that question, when you, from what I understand about the asylum process, when you get here, that process makes a lot of presumptions about your access to information and technology and things like that. So as you were coming in and as you're answering Mel's question, if you could speak to that too, about just even having an understanding of what was required of you.
And so we are actually required to have as much evidence as we can get during during the process. The thing is that the evidence might not be there. Doesn't mean we're not. I'm not coming here to tell you a story or a lie. And obviously, these things happen to me. These things happen to my family, and one person can look at you and say, I don't think it happened to you. I don't think it happened to your family simply because you might not have, say, a note that said that I was sexually assaulted 20 something years ago. Or it, I have to bring as little, I have to invite a veterinarian to tell whoever that, oh, the dog was really poisoned. You have to do every nitty gritty thing to gather as much evidence to make this to make them believe you that this is the reason why you need to stay in the United States. And it's different from a family based visa, or it's different from an employer based visa. It's a different process entirely, because unlike the family based, you can get your family to say, oh yes, we're related, and you can go do DNA and it shows that yes, you're related. But me having to relay those experiences, that this is the reason why I cannot go back to this country anymore, it's it's not. And I don't think they will look at it like, oh yeah, uh, they still look at it, they have this, I don't think it's true. The where we stay currently, like the rates of immigration cases getting approved is one of the lowest in America. And that's really, really, like, it's scary. I can tell you that's really scary.
When it comes to the support that you need,
Hmm.
um, from your community members, your community members who may be citizens, what is it that you would say is your greatest need in terms of just support? Like you said, this is a very emotionally charged and difficult process. So, to the extent that we can't change the system right now, what type of support can we lend to you and people like you who are in these situations just trying to make their way through?
So the thing is, for people like me who have been able to, say, get a good job, or I would say a relatively good job, if companies can actually reach out, your company can reach out and say, can I, file an employment based visa for you? It helps. It will, it takes that. You can actually file two cases. You can be on asylum, and an employer can file an employer based visa for you and take you away from that whole, you know, um, getting involved with meeting one person. And a lot of companies don't want to do this. They don't, yeah, I understand that they have to say, okay, um, I, I don't have any American who can do this job, and that's very understandable. You want to put your citizens first, and yes, it's understandable. But I feel if you've been in a company for a number of years and the company feels that you are a relatively high performer and they want to keep you in the company, they should find a way to make you stay. I think it's just one of the ways that organizations can help. Obviously, individuals cannot help people like me in my situation. The only way that people can, obviously help, not that we're asking, most of the time, is financial support, but, just praying for us or something, things like that, that helps. But really, I'm just here hoping and praying. Not everyone in my family is on the asylum case. My brother does have a green card. Um, we are and that's still a long process.
Mhm.
He will become a citizen soon, thankfully. Then he can, even then, filing for us takes a while. Being even though your brother and sister, it takes years for you to actually get the green card that your own brother or your own sister actually filed for you. With parents, it's easier. If they file for their parents, it's easier, it comes quickly. But if they file for the brother or the sister, it doesn't. So that's another way that the system, if they ever do a law that, as long as your siblings and DNA can show, I think there should be a faster process to, ensure the siblings also can join, um, can can um, be on that family-based visa and get a green card faster.
Cece, as you were going through this, did you ever feel that any of the steps in the process were more arbitrary, or did you feel like they were pretty straightforward?
So let me see. Right now, I would say the process that seems a little bit, and maybe because of COVID and because of what COVID has, brought to us,
Mhm.
I would say it's the work authorization process.
Mhm.
I feel it can be a little bit faster. Um, putting a lot of people in limbo, even though, yes, now they have, you know I have to give props to the USCIS people. They have, they know that they can't work as fast as they can. So instead, when you send in an application, they send you a receipt notice also telling you that your work authorization that's expired, you can use that to work for 6 more months at least, till they get you out that new card. If you've already applied for a authorization, I believe that it should be faster than 4 months. Why not try and get it to the person in 1 month? Or, you know,
And do you have anybody that advocates on your behalf to help you through this process?
so we do have lawyers that try to advocate for us during this process. We did have one before the lawyer actually passed, so we had to change lawyers, and that means going all the way from the beginning and following up with this different lawyer. So we do have a lawyer that, and what people don't know is that immigration lawyers in this country are quite expensive,
Yeah.
and very, very expensive for good reason,
Yeah.
but they are
Yeah.
very expensive.
Yeah, we had last week, we had our guest, Dr. Nancy Oretzkin, who is an immigration lawyer, and it seemed very detailed. And I know how costly that type of work can be.
Yes, it
I want
is.
to I want to thank you so much for sharing with us today, Cece. Um, I know 5 years has been a long time, and there's really nothing that we can really say, but we're very appreciative of you coming here, and I know I'm sure Susan, we will have you in our thoughts, and be as supportive as we can to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed sharing my story with people, and hopefully, somebody who is in a similar situation like me,
Yes.
can just hear and know that you're not alone, because I understand the emotional roller coaster that this is, but definitely you're not alone. And this to me is now my country, and I do love the United States and the freedom that it has given me. I can talk, and people don't, they're not coming to my house to harm me. I have very bad anxiety, and driving my daughter to school, I check
Mhm.
to see if people are driving behind me. That's how scared I am. But
Mhm.
I want this, talking to people actually helps. Even though I can't say who I am, I want people to understand that. And, other people who think that the immigration system is about people coming to steal jobs or coming to, I don't know what they think it is, but there are people like us who are literally running for our lives, literally. And my daughter, she was born here. She's an American now, and I see her grow up, and I'm grateful every day that somebody is not coming to harm my child. Like I said, I appreciate this country, and I appreciate the opportunities that I have been given. And I hope somebody hears this and knows that you're not alone.
Thank you again so much for sharing your story, Cece. I can't tell you how I'm blown away by how brave and open you are with sharing with us. So thank you a million times over.
Thank you.
I'm so moved by your story, Cece, and I can't thank you enough for sharing it with us.
Thank you both. I really do appreciate. Thank you so much.
I
Wow.
Wow.
yeah.
No
Um,
words. Yeah.
And that's
it
part of
was
what I think is really powerful about these American stories, right? We all have them. It's
yeah,
just a matter of how far back and how deep you'd like to go in your research and exploration of that.
yeah,
And this is not American history. This is something we are actively working with and dealing with. People are living in these truths at the moment and
yeah.
trying to find ways to move forward. And I mean, that's part of that greatness of America, and that there's the space and capacity to do that. So I really appreciate her ability to share that story with us.
This is and when you say present, this is something Cece has been dealing with this for 5 years. She's made a life here. She's had a child here, and and still has very much a lot of her past that still comes into her present and how she navigates her day to day. Just driving. These are things that a lot of people take for granted, and it's unfortunately not as uncommon as it should be. And we're dealing with real people who are in need of real compassion and support. And in terms of support, Athena, I think we have some comments.
Yes, we had a couple of comments come through. One, just to sort of wrap up the previous discussions, this idea that even though people are sometimes able to get work visas, there are very strict requirements to be able to remain employed. So it's still very stressful for people who are tethered to that requirement when they're here. But obviously, that's always good advice to be considerate of coworkers who might be struggling in gaps for employment in order to remain in the country. And we did get one question specifically for Christine, back to the story that she was sharing earlier about her family and her American journey and story. But what does your family miss from back home?
I feel lucky because I live in Los Angeles. The thing that a lot of immigrants often miss about back home is the food, the culture, the extended family tied to it. And much of my extended family over the years ended up back here in the U.S. But I think what we miss, or what I miss, is just, and this might sound a little heavy, but this awareness over the last 18 months with the rise of anti-Asian sentiment, you become really present to the fact that we've always known we are minorities per se, right? But as I tell my son, as somebody of Asian descent, we're actually a majority in the rest of the world, 60% of the population around the world. And I'm cognizant of that here, whereas we are often made to feel like we are minorities. We are called model minority. The thing I miss about, I spent some time living and working in Asia in my early years after college. There's this whole dimension of things you don't have to worry about, like feeling othered when you're just trying to walk down the street or into a restaurant or, in a meeting. And this constant awareness, and it's not just as an immigrant, right? It's just all of us who are either, marginalized groups. That's what I actually miss, right? About the times that I go back to Asia is this feeling that you aren't a minority. So if I
And
could
there,
offer that.
I have to agree with that 100%. Just with this whole Stop Asian Hate movements that are taking place around the country right now, I just feel like this desire to be in Asia calling me very strongly. So
But it's interesting.
Definitely.
That's the reaction to us wanting to feel safe. And then the fighting side of me, right? The side of me that goes, I'll be damned if my parents immigrated here in the 70s, owned a Chinese restaurant and raised me and paid my tuition so I can be quiet. There's that beautiful American side of me. And in Cece's interview, actually, Mel, I really heard that. There's this awareness of immigrants, that
yeah.
we are very aware of how we are viewed by certain people who don't ever see us as American, right? But in spite of that, you can also hear the gratefulness of her being able to raise her daughter in a country that she is now, adopted part of and she loves. I just gives me goosebumps. That's the story.
Something as
That's right
it's
there.
something, no, I totally understand that. It's something that as a Black woman born in America, you can kind of take for granted those certain type, that there's a freedom that comes with literally not being politically targeted. And then when you listen to her story, she's politically targeted years after the rest of her family has left. Like her father has left the country. Her brother has left the country. She's there alone and still. So it was, but she has such an amazing spirit that there's a part of me that hates when this is put up on. Of course, I can personalize it as a Black woman because we have to deal with the strong Black woman trope, whether you're American born or anywhere else. But then there's also the idea of nobody should have to endure that. And then when they come to a place where they're seeking safety, there should be it you would hope that it would not be as stressful as it is. But the fact that she is in the fight was just so heartwarming, and maybe heartwarming is not the right word, but encouraging that she is standing up for herself. And there are so many other different stories. Our super producer, Scott McTaggart, wrote an amazing article that you can find at resist.bot.news called Our American Stories, where it references, he references Dr. Kataki Desai, who had a completely different experience where she went years, 12 years, attempting to get citizenship. And she was somebody who had made significant impact on her community here in America. And yet it was not impossible for her to get citizenship. She finally moved to Canada, and that's where she is now, and is now a Canadian citizen. So I would recommend that everyone take a look at that article. You can find it again at resist.bot/news, and that's Our American Stories. I also would be remiss if I did not thank our favorite Susan Stutz for joining us with Cece yesterday, who always has the great questions and observations on social issues. So we're going to this story isn't going anywhere. Immigration is not going anywhere. Another thing I wanted to think about, we haven't really scratched the surface. If you think back when Valissa Thompson was here, when we talked about disabled poverty, how with every story you have, there's there's an angle for disability in there, and we haven't even scratched what it's like to immigrate to this country when you're someone with a physical disability or any disability. So there are so many facets of this, and we won't be leaving this story. There will always be an opportunity for us to discuss immigration because nothing says neighbors like our neighbors from other countries. So before we head out, I wanted to talk about the current events that we are having our eye on this week. Brian Laundrie, his remains were allegedly found after they had been searching for him for the last 2 months. You may remember his deceased girlfriend, Gabby Petito, went missing, and then her remains were found on September 18th. Among other things, there was a domestic violence issue with them where there was a call that just obviously ended in tragedy. And that is going to lead us next week. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And next week, we are going to have a guest and we will be discussing domestic violence and how it is handled in this country. So we hope that you guys join us next Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Athena, wanted to kick it to you.
Sure, thanks. I am very excited about how labor unions are on the rise in the United States, and support for unions are really taking off in this new world after we're sort of recovering from global pandemic, or trying to. And from IATSE in Hollywood going on strike to just different laborers around the US. And which reminded me, it also ties into the fact that October is actually Filipino American Heritage Month. And we would be remiss in discussing anything related to Filipino American history if we did not roll it back to Delano grape strike in the 1970s, where Larry Itliong, Filipino American hero, organized farmers at that time to go on strike and demand fair wages and access to basic things like restrooms for the farm workers at that time. And by partnering with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, obviously, the United Farm Workers Movement was created through that work. So I celebrate and lift up all of my Filipino American kababayans. And again, as a time where unions are rediscovering their power in the COVID world, I think it would be absolutely beautiful to understand how that really ties into the power of the immigrant experience in the United States. So, happy Filipino American Heritage Month. I wish, or my wish for us all is that we continue to know our history and empower all of these marginalized communities to, claim our place and story in the fabric of American life. This is who we are. So we need to know these stories. We need to share these stories. We need to tell these stories. And I appreciate Christine's, and I appreciate Cece's, and I look forward to hearing more as this podcast continues to evolve and develop.
Thank you so much, Athena and Christine. We want to close out with you.
Yeah, no. So I would just say check my Twitter feed because my current events are always current. I'm always reacting
I love the Twitter
I'm
feed.
always reacting to things that and it's we all have diverse interests, but specifically you'll hear me still paying attention to the geopolitics of U.S.-China relations, and actually that affects us so much here in the U.S. In regards to economics, in regards to just our feeling of safety. But my lens is it is very difficult being on this bridge of trying to both acknowledge criticism of a government that you disagree with, authoritarian regimes, while making sure that we remember to differentiate the country's people from its government. And the experience of Chinese Americans here right now, and those who look Chinese to people who are otherwise ignorant. It's real. The anti-Chinese sentiment, as we see the political tensions increase, those that are, ignorant here in the U.S. Will tend to increase their animosity towards certain groups of folks, and I think that's always unfair. So here we go. So, yep, that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you both. I also want to thank our regular panelist, Susan Stutz, for joining us. Special thanks to Cece and also Dr. Kataki Desai. Thank all of you for sharing your stories. Thank all of you for joining us this week. I want you to remember that we are streaming on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube every Sunday, and video replays will be available. The podcast will go up in the early part of the week. I believe we are going up around Tuesday. I am choking down, not making a reference to the club going up on a Tuesday. If you want to learn more about Resistbot, you can volunteer and donate at resist.bot. And that's been our show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Have a great weekend.
Resistbot Live originally airs as a live stream every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, and is brought to you by the same folks behind the chatbot. If you haven't used Resistbot before, it's simple. iPhone users, go to resist.bot on the web and tap the iMessage button. Non-iPhone users, open your text messaging app and compose a new text message. For the phone number, type 50409. In the message field, type resist or any of the keywords you heard on the show. You can also direct message Resistbot on Twitter or the Telegram app. For a printable keyword guide and more, visit our website at resist.bot. Our website has a complete guide to creating powerful public policy or voter turnout campaigns, and we're here to support your activism. Email support@resist.bot if you need help getting started. Resistbot is a non-profit social welfare company built by volunteers and supported by your donations. You can donate on our website or email volunteer@resist.bot if you want to join our team. Regular contributors include Melanie Dion, Athena Foulay, Susan Stutz, Dr. Joseph Kuhil, and Scott McTaggart. Thank you for listening.